Hello, welcome back. And here we're continuing to talk about, okay, well, what is good practice for mentors? And the first thing I want to talk to you about is about boundaries and where that line is for your relationship with your mentees. First of all, it's really important that you talk with your mentee about confidentiality and when you would break it. The occasions that you break it. I mean, so an example would be actually if you suspected that there was some kind of abuse going on, some kind of child abuse or vulnerable person abuse or something like that, or there was an offence being committed, then actually there would be a time that actually you would have a duty to break the confidentiality of your session and report it. At the same time, if actually you're talking about how a mentee feels about someone else and actually that they're worried about them, then you're not going to go up to the other person. Let's say they've just been talking about Asmat. You're not going to go up to Asmat and ask Asmat how he is, because that would be inappropriate to break the confidentiality in that way. You couldn't talk to Asmat's boss or teacher or whoever, and say, I've heard Asmat's really struggling at the moment. Again, it wouldn't be appropriate at all. There's boundaries in terms of confidentiality, really important. So if you think someone's in danger, if you think there is some abuse going on, or even if you think that actually the person might hurt themselves, then actually you're going to almost have a duty to break that confidentiality. Likewise, there could be a case where actually a court action or something like that forces you to break that confidentiality. But apart from that, most of the rest of the time, what's happening in your mentoring sessions should be confidential, and you should make that clear with your mentees. Likewise, things like our relationship and all the rest of it, because actually I am your mentor. I'm not going to be your friend. So if actually we find that we become friends, for example, then it'd be very hard for us to be able to hold an independent mentoring perspective. Just the same as it's entirely possible for adult mentors and mentees to end up in some kind of romantic relationship. And again, the moment that relationship dynamic changes, then it completely undermines and causes a conflict of interest with the mentoring relationship. And so mentoring should stop at that point. And so that's, again, is important, understanding the boundary about the relationship in terms of mentoring. And likewise, things like the way that we talk to our mentees. We need to agree with them, the style that we're going to use. For example, I know that some mentors will try and shock their mentees, or maybe they'll use foul language and all the rest of it. But actually, that again needs to be part and parcel of your relationship, of what you are expecting in that mentor-mentee relationship. And so again, that comes back to it. So it's another boundary that's there. Things like meeting up with them informally, all of those sorts of things, again, need to be really clear. So boundaries are really important in terms of a mentoring relationship. A boundary in between a mentor and a mentee. We are friendly, but we are not friends. It's really important that we keep that objective difference, because otherwise it does change the dynamic of that relationship. Now let's talk about record keeping for a second. This is good practice for mentors as well, to keep some form of record of what your mentoring sessions involve. This is so important, whether you're working with young people, whether you're working with workplace mentoring schemes, it doesn't matter. It's really important that actually you somehow find some system, and certainly do talk to us if you want a computerized system, but it's important that you find some system for recording your notes as a mentor, so that actually, when it comes to the next mentoring session, on a practical level, you can then refer back to where you were, for example. If actually, 6 months down the line, your mentee says to you, what was it you were saying about such and such, you can then refer back to your notes. But likewise, let's say something goes horribly wrong. Now, I hope this never happens to you, but let's say something's gone horribly wrong and it ends up in court. then actually you need those notes to be able to refer back to what sort of things you were talking about. Let's say someone ends up in court involved in some kind of abuse case or something like that. Then you need to refer back to those notes to find out the sorts of topics that you were talking about, for example. And so it's really important for you to keep some form of records as a mentor. What you'll also find is that once you do start record keeping as a mentor, you then naturally start to evaluate your sessions a lot more. And it does help you to reflect on, okay, it does, if you take 5-10 minutes after a mentoring session is finished, just to sit there, right, if you notice, it helps you to reflect on what you've just done and to think about different things you could have said. And very often what I find is, I could have said that. And so I then make a note of, actually, next session, I need to remember to talk about that. Another thing, which is quite a big thing, is thinking about diversity and thinking about our own unconscious biases. So diversity, huge issue, really affecting mentoring relationships around the world, whether it's about ethnicity, whether it's about gender, whether it's about social status, all sorts of things, whether it's about sexuality, all sorts of things affect us in terms of diversity. And the reason it affects us is because of something called unconscious bias. And unconscious bias is where your brain tries to make a shortcut. An example would be if I said to you, okay, picture a nurse. I would imagine that most of you, probably 99 out of 100 of you, will picture a female nurse, because what's happened there is your brain has made a little shortcut. Your brain has gone from job, nurse, gender, female nurse. So that's how your brain has gone. So what your brain does, once this happens a few times, and it's backed up by things like stereotypes, by things that you see in society, what happens after a few times is that actually your brain goes from here just straight across there. And so it introduces almost like a hard wire shortcut. So it doesn't need to do that bit. And that's why when, for example, as I say, when I think about, when I ask you to think about nurse, very often most people will think about female nurse because that's what's happening in your brain. Now, you can tackle this, you can challenge it by questioning yourself, by actually recognizing that this is an unconscious bias, and that there are some online assessments you can do to identify your own unconscious biases. But the important thing is that with unconscious bias, you don't realize it's there. Once you realize it's there, you can then start to focus it, you can start to question it. And unconscious bias affects many things, including, a recent study, so they looked at job applications, and they looked at the unconscious bias to do with people's names. And they submitted the same CV into jobs with different names on it, and they found that just the names affected whether that person got through to an interview or not. Exactly the same CV. And that's an example of unconscious bias. If actually someone reminds you, for example, if someone reminds you of your granny, an elderly person reminds you of your granny, you are therefore going to try, probably subconsciously treat them the same, or expect them to act the same, or expect them to behave in the same way because of this unconscious bias. But when it comes to unconscious bias, it's really important that you understand that as a mentor, this affects our view of diversity. And it will be affecting our mentees as well. And I honestly, if you want to know more about unconscious bias, please do get in touch, because we do unconscious bias training. We do like whole weekends where we study just finding out about our own unconscious biases. But really important that you understand that one of the main issues around diversity is about unconscious bias. Classic example, let's say a male and female are both working for the same company. They're married, their child is ill at school. Who's the person that goes and collects them? Primarily, even under shared parental leave, primarily what you'll find is that it tends to be the woman. Sometimes it can be for practical reasons, and there's actual conversations. Sometimes it's the man that goes and picks up the child, and vice versa. But Actually, if it's just an assumption, then actually what you're talking about there is probably an unconscious bias. Hugely impactful, but really important that for us as mentors, that we recognize that when we're in a mentoring session, actually, we need to be wary of any unconscious biases that we have, that we then project onto our mentees, that we encourage them subconsciously to then act out as well. Right, anyway, that brings us to the end of this short course introducing the theory of mentoring. I hope that you found it really useful. I hope you've learned lots from it. What I'd like you to do now, please, is to carry out the short little test. Test your skills on the things that I've been talking about. I'm going to wish you good luck. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.